Welcome to Husband Talking. Explore riveting tales of infidelity with us. Please subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's begin.
Finding bad news in a bank statement isn't rare for most people. It happens often, maybe leading to much worse problems than mine, but that didn't make it any easier for me. I was just going through some papers on my wife's desk, trying to see if she had paid the phone bill or something simple like that. That's when I found an unexpected bank statement from a place called Maple Bank, hidden under a pile of other bills. I noticed it because we normally use Crescent Bank, and the red title stood out to me. Funny how her attempt to hide it in a different bank is what made me look at it. First, I checked the name at the top, and it read Alice Carter, so no surprise there. But the address I would never heard of, somewhere in the north end of Chicago, way north of Springfield, where we lived. Next, I checked the figure at the bottom, 18,600, a tidy balance, but where had it come from? I had no idea. Then I looked at the list of transactions over the last 3 months and was staggered at the regular large sums of money that had been going into it. 700 one day, over 1,200 a week later, then 900 just 6 days later, and so it went on. Now, I make a good living from my business and was used to largish sums of money, but Alice only did a bit of part-time work for some marketing firm, an occasional afternoon or, more likely, an evening at the most, a weekend standing in for someone at some event or other, and even then mainly only for the fun of it, as it didn't pay a fortune. It was when I scanned the list of payouts that I was really thrown, as there, every month, was the same sum of money taken out by Standing Order 600. The sum sounded worryingly familiar. I walked over to her cabinet, a fancy old-fashioned roll-top affair from the late 19th century, opened it and got out my wife's filing folder. She was always very neat and precise, Alice, and I knew exactly where to look, as we shared everything, no secrets between us, or at least there hadn't been till then. I found the Crescent Bank statements and scanned through them quickly till I found what I wanted, having no compunctions about going through her bank details as she showed them to me regularly. There it was, in black and white, her salary from the agency, 600 every month. I was lost, absolutely lost. It seemed that Alice was paying herself her own salary from her own bank account. Why the hell would she do that? Did she really have a job at all? Where on earth did the money come from in the first place? Was this something to worry about? And was it any of my business? Like hell it was. What was Alice up to? I grabbed the Maple Bank statement again and studied it in more detail, realizing that virtually the only money ever withdrawn seemed to be the monthly payments, whereas the payments in were sporadic, frequent, but with no pattern to them. It then occurred to me that there was an awful lot more money going in than coming out, so I looked back at the balance at the bottom of the last page. Bloody hell, it wasn't 18,600. I would missed a zero, and it was 186,000. My name is John Carter. I'm 45, quite presentable, and run my own construction business where I employ 2 other people. My wife Alice is 35, 10 years younger than me, and to my mind just about the right age difference. I give her my maturity, such as I have, my experience in life, and a very comfortable lifestyle. She gives me her relative youth, her beauty which she has in abundance, and all the fun in the world. We both give one another our loving, both spiritually and physically, without reserve. We are both, without doubt, after 5 years of marriage, still head over heels in love with one another, as I had been since our first day. I would been up in Chicago for a meeting with a guy to discuss some deal with a big contractor, and I was sitting in the hotel bar afterward, thinking about the possible advantages of going along with their idea. Then Alice walked in, and my insides flipped. It's not that I didn't have a girlfriend. In fact, I probably had too many, but none of them were that special. Somehow I knew that she could be special, but only if I could get to know her. Alice was 56, tall, slim, with nice shapely tan legs that seemed to go on forever from the dainty high heels on her feet till they disappeared under the very short cocktail dress that she wore. She had longish blonde hair and deep blue eyes with a cute little turned-up nose. My dream girl wasn't a classic beauty, but she didn't need to be, and every man in the place must have been eyeing her up, all no doubt with similar thoughts to my own. She simply oozed breeding, elegance, confidence, fun, and sex, and not necessarily in that order. I'm sure everyone watched her as she looked around, nodding to the receptionist who obviously knew her, no doubt a regular resident. Then she looked straight at me, and my insides did a somersault as her soft blue eyes melted away any doubts that I wanted her. I smiled back and acknowledged her, wondering what the hell to do next, but didn't have to worry about it. A smile that would have lit up the street outside flashed across her face, and she walked towards me, suggesting that maybe. "Hi, you must be John," she said, to my surprise. "John, not John," I replied, my voice perhaps a bit hoarse. John, what's the difference?" She laughed. and I wasn't about to argue with her. "May I sit down?" she asked in her rather clipped, very Midwest accent, but very sweet. Of course, came my urgent response, leaping up to pull the chair back for her. Even the way she sat down showed class, as if she had been taught how to do it at some posh finishing school. I wondered, why me? What had I done to earn the attention of this dreamin' legs of a woman? How on earth did she know my name? "I'm Alice," she said. "Sorry I'm late, but I got held up. Thanks for waiting." She then looked at me and asked, "Are you okay, John?" I was fine. But she later laughed as she told me that I had looked totally shocked. I recovered quickly, however, and within moments we were engaged in gentle banter, delighted to discover that we shared so many interests: the same music, tennis, Italian food, and, believe it or not, even soccer. Alice was an educated woman and could speak about a whole range of subjects, unlike the others that I had been with lately. Then her mobile rang. She excused herself and answered it. I heard her say, "No, I'm here. No, he's here as well. Couldn't be, heck, here with me. Oh dear, oh golly, hang on a moment." She looked at me quizzically, the smile returning to her lovely features, and I stared back. "Were you expecting me by any chance?" she asked. "No, but I'm very pleased you arrived," I replied cheekily. "You're not John Green at all, are you?" "No, I'm John Carter." "Oh," she said as she giggled and lifted her mobile up. She said into it, "I was late and I've got the wrong John, or John, actually." Her use of profanities with her posh accent was wonderful, sounded so out of place yet so natural. She turned her head and half covered her mouth, so that I could not make out the next few exchanges between her and whoever was on the other end of the line. I just knew I was going to lose her in the next few minutes and desperately tried to think of something. Then Alice looked back at me, still holding the phone, that smile verging on a grin spreading back across her face. "No, he's quite cute actually," she said into the phone but staring straight at me, making sure that I could hear. "Rather good-looking in a rugged sort of way. I think I may have blushed. Okay then, give him my apologies. Next time he's in the US, maybe," and she finished her conversation, slipping her mobile back into her bag. "Well then," she said, "looks like I've missed my appointment." "Never mind." The smile never left her face. "Assuming you're free this evening, what do you fancy doing? And how about we do it together?" I refrained from telling her what my first choice would have been and suggested that we have dinner. She readily agreed, and that's exactly what we did, the best meal of my life, and I hardly noticed what we ate. I was already under her spell. Alice told me about her job in marketing, how she set up meetings, arranged discrete functions, helped her agency to put people together in the right place at the right time. She obviously loved it, and I was already hoping that she could love me as much. After the meal, I walked her back to the taxi rank, overjoyed to see that there was a small queue and that I would have more time to chat and this time to hold her. I put my arm around her and she snuggled up, sliding her arm around my waist and cuddling up to me. I kissed her lightly on the cheek, and she returned the favor, just the sweet smell of her sending my senses into overdrive. Then she looked around, maneuvered me between her and the others in the queue, put her arms up around my neck, and pulled me down till our lips met. Heaven. Just the briefest of touches, but it was like discovering the land of milk and honey, and I had the honey in my arms. I got carried away and almost disgraced myself as I kissed her more hungrily, running my hands over her back, feeling the soft curve as it descended down to her bottom. "Hey, hang on, she cried and then laughed. "Give a girl a chance, can't you? We've only just met." I drew back, disappointed but not really, frustrated but not really. This was some special girl and worth the effort, worth the wait. "Sorry," I apologized. "Got carried away." And she giggled deliciously yet again. "Slowly," she said. "Kiss me slowly. It'll be worth it in the long run." Christ, I was lost, and I think it was then that I fell in love with Alice, my wife that was. On our first accidental date, I suggested we might go back to my hotel for a nightcap, but she'd have none of it, teasing me that I was after a little more than that and that a first date was just too soon. "Can I see you again?" I asked, and she teased me again, humming and hawing about whether it would be worth it, all the time holding on to me, holding me against her beautiful slim body and sending me crazy with desire. "Okay." She relented at last, shrugging her lovely shoulders. "I'll ring you. What's your number?" "I don't trust you," I said a bit boldly. "You give me yours and I'll ring you." "No can do, John," Alice replied quietly. "I don't give my number out, especially to handsome strangers. I'm afraid I'll ring you." We made a compromise and agreed to meet the following Friday. Too long for me, but the earliest she could manage. What was I going to do about this newfound knowledge about my wife's affairs? Why did she have all this money, and where did it come from? Sure, her parents were rich, owned an estate down in Wisconsin, hunted, shot pheasants, and owned a fair share of one of the smaller investment banks, one that had survived the aftermaths of the big crash as well. So obviously the family was well connected. There was no reason why my wife wouldn't have money, even sums like that. But where had it come from, and why in obscure, if substantial, sums? It had to be something to do with the marketing company she worked for, but really I had no idea. I would ask her. I just knew I couldn't. If she was hiding it from me, then there was a reason, and I had to find out that reason, and whatever it cost, I have to admit it frightened me a bit. Though it seemed impossible, it seemed that Alice seemed to be mixed up in some shady deal or something. I had to go down to Chicago a few days afterward, so I looked up the address on the statement. It was a swishy area and rare of money, old money, just the sort of place Alice's family would feel comfortable in. At least that relaxed me a little. I looked at the brass plates on the door, but none of them meant anything, just a couple catching my eye: corporate agency and Golden Circle agency, the others all being accountants or stockbrokers by the sound of them. I waited around for a while, but nobody arrived or left. No joy there. I had drawn a blank and didn't know how to proceed. All I could do was confront her, but that didn't appeal at all. She was hiding something from me, and now it seemed possible her family were involved. I had to find out what, and perhaps more importantly, why. Our second date was memorable, and I remember quite clearly what she wore. The tight denim jeans and white sweater would have looked good on any attractive woman. William Lauren just has that ability, but on her it was stunning. I'm sure it was for women like my wife that designers like him got their inspiration. It was a woman like my wife, perhaps, that launched 1,000 ships. We went to the theater, then on for a late dinner. It was superb. Again, no idea at all what we ate. Afterwards, the two of us strolled down the banks of the river, arm in arm like lovers have done throughout time, and I sort of assumed she would come back to my hotel. She did. And I sort of assumed she would come up to my room. She did. And I sort of assumed that she would join me in bed. She didn't. She wouldn't. Not that we didn't enjoy ourselves, and not that I didn't manage to persuade her out of her sweater, her beautiful firm breasts being everything and more than I could ever have hoped for. She grabbed me, kissed me passionately, forcing her tongue in between my lips, twirling it around mine, the very taste of her sending me into a trance. My fingers started to undo the top button, and she gasped, cried out, her hips already gyrating, thrusting herself up to my hand. Then she stopped, just like that, realizing perhaps how far we were going and what it would lead to. No, please, no, she whispered, holding my hand but without the resolve to actually push it away. I'm not ready. Not yet. Please don't. It was maybe the most difficult decision I ever made in my life till then. I stopped, pulled back. She made no attempt to stop me, almost daring me to defy her, looking at me imploringly. However, trusting me not to. Then the moment was over, and we cuddled up, kissing and holding one another tightly. Bloody hell, we were adults, me in my 40s and her in her 30s, but she wasn't ready. Not yet. I asked what the problem was, if there was indeed a problem, and she nodded, whispered yes, and then burst into tears. What can you do if you love the woman? And by then I undoubtedly did. Then you accept it. I held her tightly, spoke to her calmly, and told her that everything was okay. We lay there like that, and my passion died slowly down, only my love for her remaining. A good hour later, she sighed and eventually got up, apologized, and tears started to run down her cheeks again. I'm sorry, she whimpered. I'm in such a mess, such an awful mess. You've no idea at all. I pulled her tight to me, the tighter the better, to make all her problems go away, and eventually, for the time being at least, they did. Thank you, John, she said at last. You are the most wonderful man. She kissed me and everything seemed fine. We stayed there cuddling for some time, but it had to end, and I found myself escorting her out to the taxis yet again. 1 in the morning and still no sex, but I would never felt so bloody good in my life. I thought about confronting Alice with the problem of where all the money had come from and why was she paying herself. At best, it could be from her family, maybe cash they were stashing away from the taxman. That took my fancy for some time, but it was too easy, too convenient, and I knew there was more to it. I had no other explanation, nothing at all, just a knot building up in my stomach that not all was as it seemed, and that I was in for a major shock. Though even then, I did not imagine how big a shock I was in for. I followed her one evening all the way to Chicago, when she was off on one of her jobs for the marketing firm, keeping her Lexus carefully in my sights to see if she really did go to the hotel where her company had set up some meeting or other, or whether she would slip off to meet someone sinister. But no, there she was, pulled up outside the correct hotel, good as gold, elegantly stepping out of her car and handing the keys to some attendant. Nothing to get upset about, and several hours wasted by following her all the way down from Springfield. What a bloody fool I had become. I resolved to just ask her. The explanation would surely be quite simple. I would ask her that very night when she got back, however late it might be. But she didn't come back that night and woke me in the morning. The ring of the telephone bringing me back into the real world, away from my tormented sleep as I raised myself from the sofa where I had spent the night waiting for her return. "Hi, John." She chirped as happy and bright as a lark. "Sorry, got really tied up in some discussions last night, and the company paid for a room at the hotel for me. Went well though. Be back before lunchtime. How about lunch at the bridge and he'll tell you about it." "Why didn't you ring me last night?" I demanded. "I've been worried." "I did," she said with concern, but there was no answer. "I left a message." I looked down, and sure enough, the message light was flashing on the phone. She must have rung when I was on my way back from Chicago, and I hadn't noticed when I would come in with all the other things on my mind. I agreed to meet her at the bridge, but I was still confused. I felt the world closing in on me. I didn't know what to do or what else to say. The next week, I followed her again, feeling like a traitor, hating myself for the distrust that I felt and the thoughts that were permeating my brain. Our third date was a defining moment. I would look forward to it like an adolescent, hoping against hope that all would go well, hoping that I might get her into bed, but even more than that, praying that the date would go well, that she would be happy, and that the awkward tensions of our previous date would not resurface. We met on neutral ground, halfway between Chicago and Springfield, at a lovely little inn that I had discovered some months before. It was an inspired choice, and Alice was relaxed from the start. Everything I could have wished for. From the moment she turned every head in the place when she arrived till she whispered in my ear at the end of our meal. "Do they have rooms here, John?" she asked, and my prayers seemed answered. It would be difficult to describe how wonderful that night was, but I'll try. I was no virgin by a long way, but it seemed that I had discovered one, a rare find in one so beautiful, already into her 30s. She was so nervous as I undressed her, as if I had been the first one to ever do so, shivering as I undid her dress and allowed it to drop to the floor. I rested her down back on the bed, determined that if it was to be her first time, then she would never forget it. Her breathing was heavy and rapid, her eyes closed. "John, John, please, John," she whispered huskily, but the rest was lost as a shudder ran through her lovely body that could only have been one thing. Her body relaxed, and she lay back, opening her eyes at last, looking up at me with an expression that said only one thing. I love you, John. I really love you," my woman stuttered uncertainly. "I think I'm ready now. Please be gentle." Then we had amazing sex. I took back over control from her, withdrawing just a little as I made love to her, and she returned it in full. We lay silently in each other's arms, relishing one another's nakedness, both satisfied and contented. "Thank you, John," Alice whispered into my chest. "Thank you, my love." I kissed her and told her how much I loved her as well. "I needed that, John," she said after a few moments. "I've needed that for a long time, and am just so glad it was you." The second time that I followed Alice was even easier. I knew the hotel where her meeting was scheduled, and I let Alice get ahead, arriving half an hour or so after her and wondering what the hell I was doing there and quite what I was going to do. I slunk into the reception area, terrified that she would spot me, having no idea what explanation I could possibly make for my being there. She wasn't there, of course, why should she be? So I made my way to the bar, peeping in, already having decided that this was all so stupid, so childish, and that I would leave immediately if she wasn't there. But Alice was there in the bar chatting to some guy. She was sat with her back to me, but I knew it was her. The man she was talking to looked American, much older than Alice, maybe in his late 50s, expensively dressed and impeccably groomed. I felt the tension draining out of me as I realized that he was exactly as he should be, a rich client of the agency. Obviously some businessman that she was discussing some arrangements with. I felt such a fool, cursing myself for suspecting that Alice had been involved with some man, though I hadn't even allowed myself to admit to those thoughts till that moment. What was I to do then? I was still no nearer to the truth about the money. But at least my main fear had been Aleix wasn't having an affair. Maybe this guy was something to do with all the money she'd been hiding away, but I was no super sleuth and had no way of progressing further. Go home. I thought to myself, just go home and stop being so silly. Another few hours wasted driving up to Chicago and back, just because of my stupid doubts. Then Alice stood up, and my stomach went tight. She looked fabulous and so sexy in a tight black mini dress that just skimmed below her bottom, leaving her long, slim legs so bare and molding around her body so that even from across the room, I could see she couldn't possibly have been wearing a bra. The tightness in my middle gripped tighter, but it wasn't how gorgeous my wife looked, but that I would never seen that dress before, and it certainly wasn't the smart gray skirt suit that Alice had left our house in just a few hours before. My chest went tight, but I told myself I was being silly again. Unreasonable. Why wouldn't she change for an evening meeting? Why shouldn't Alice look sexy to impress an important customer? Then she laughed at something he said and smiled at him, our smile. The one that would light up the street outside. The smile that I always imagined she reserved for me. Worse, she reached up to him and put her hand on his chest. Playfully, coquettishly. Not the sort of gesture a woman would make to a business client. Not unless she knew him well, very well indeed. The thought that it could be a friend of her father's flashed through my Mindan old family friend. Maybe like an uncle, but I was clutching at straws. When Alice reached up, stretching on her tiptoes to kiss him on the cheek, my world started to go black. A dark rage come over me, only getting worse as he bent down and returned the kiss, but directly on her lips, the two of them holding it for longer than any uncle and niece had a right to. The prick, the scumsucker, the cheating scumsucker. I would kill him, but I could only stand there and watch as Alice played up even more to him, cuddling up to him as he put his arm affectionately around her, grinning at him as she so often did to me, as he patted her bottom, molding her gorgeous body into his as he squeezed her tightly. I couldn't breathe. I needed air, but I couldn't leave, couldn't pull myself away from the dreadful scene being played out before my eyes. They kissed again, this time with even more feeling, and Alice, my beautiful sweet Alice, seemed blissfully lost in the company of this unknown man. "Can I help you, sir?" I looked around, and there was some uniformed flunky questioning my right to be there, questioning my right to watch my beloved wife make out with some scumsucker stranger. "Go to hell," I shouted far too loudly. It all got out of hand after that, and he called for help, three of them manhandling me out to the back in trance as I watched Alice going off with the stranger, laughing at his no doubt stupid bloody jokes, running her hand up and down his back, and making no objection as he reached down and cupped the cheeks of her bum as if he owned it. I found myself on the floor in a back alley. A few scratches on my face, but no serious harm done. I made my way back to the front and stormed back in, determined to confront her, to find out what was going on. But the security guys caught me again, threw me out on my ear, threatening to be less gentle if I didn't bug her off, unwilling to listen to my pleas that my wife was in there with another man. I slinked off, searching hopelessly up at the windows, wondering which set of curtains they were hidden behind, and the thought of what that scumsucker was doing to my Alice, my dearest Alice, tearing at my soul. What hold did he have over her? Where did the money come into this? Damn it, the money didn't matter anymore. My wife Alice was in there somewhere, being screwed by her lover, and I was powerless to stop it. Again, a flashback after that last date. Things went wonderfully. I felt like a teenager in love again, and it just never seemed to go away. Alice seemed the same, and I met her parents, who seemed overjoyed that at last someone had won her heart. We were married 6 months afterward, the biggest wedding I would ever been to or ever likely to, all paid for by her wealthy parents, who seemed more interested in making a good show than anything else. I vaguely tried to find out if she had some troubled past experience, why she had apparently still been a virgin in her 30s in this day and age, but she didn't wish to discuss it, promising to tell me all about it one day, and we were so happy, so in love, that it didn't seem to matter anyway. The first 6 months were bliss, unless you worked for me, of course, in which case it seemed that nobody could get much sense out of me. It didn't matter as everyone was happy for me, even my competitors, so touched that they didn't take too much advantage, like hell they didn't. It came as a wake-up call when we lost a big account, and I had to put a lot more effort into my business. Not that I neglected Alice, however, but she felt the difference, I suppose, lost a bit of her spirit and acted a bit down. "What's up, Alice? Love?" I asked for the 10th time, not really expecting a sensible answer. She looked at me, sighed, and at last told me. "I'm a bit bored," she admitted. "Not with you, not at all. You're wonderful." I smiled back at her, happy to hear her say it. even though our lovemaking had waned considerably over the last few months. I need something to interest me, keep my brain working. Maybe I could do a bit of work for my old agency. Shed stopped working for them just after our marriage and had seemed happy. But it was true that just lately, there was obviously something missing in her life. Would they take you back? Have you asked them? I ventured, thinking it might be a good idea. Alice smiled. It was that smile, and I knew her mind was made up and that I had no argument, even if I thought of one. They've rung me every month since we were married. They're desperate for me to go back, she sang out. I've sort of suggested that I might go back and do a bit, just part-time. It was settled. The following week she went back up to Chicago to see them and started a few days later, doing some afternoon meeting thing for them. She came home that evening full of smiles, happy as Larry. Shed had a great day and all was well again. The Carter household was back on track. I had nothing to complain about as Alice rediscovered her zest for life and the energy for sex, even more than before, though I wouldn't have thought it possible. Alice had always liked straightforward sex previously, which I put down to her lack of experience, shying nervously away from anything out of the ordinary. But from then on, she became liberated, totally prepared to try anything. It was surprising how naturally good at it all she was and how much she loved it. I had no idea why I deserved this unrivaled pleasure. I didn't worry about it, and I just enjoyed it. The next 2 years or so were incredible, the earlier problems having disappeared. We spent every possible spare moment together, and I pined when she was out for the evening, even more so when she was away for a whole weekend in Paris, New York, or wherever. But her job took her mainly down to Chicago, and whenever I could, I tried to arrange something so that I could meet her down there and have lunch before she disappeared off for the evening to some function or other. Then I found that bank statement and it all changed. I couldn't believe she was cheating on me, but the evidence was there. I would seen it. I would seen her kissing and cuddling up to her boyfriend in the hotel. I would seen his hand on her ass, his fingers disappearing up under the back of her short dress. There was no doubt in my mind that they had ended up inside it not much later on. The thought of that brought tears of frustrated rage to my eyes. How could she do this? How could she cheat me like this? What was so special about this American guy? What did he have that I didn't? A bigger tool or what? Damn it, he was 20 years older than me, 30 years older than her. Maybe it was someone she worked with, but he looked well off, so perhaps it was her boss. And I seem to remember her saying that one of the directors was an American. However close a working relationship, bosses aren't allowed those liberties, not unless there's something going on. My mind went in circles till I felt like bursting into tears. Maybe this had been going on for some time, maybe that's why she wanted to go back to work for them. Maybe... Oh damn it, I didn't know what to think. It was a Thursday, the morning after I would been thrown out of the hotel, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I would heard Alice's car arrive home in the early hours, and I wondered how many other times she had come home this late when she'd been with him without me knowing when I was fast asleep. It was some time before she came up to bed, and even in the gloom, I could make out that she had changed into her nightgown already, maybe showered in the spare bedroom as well, maybe so that I wouldn't detect the smell of her lover on her. I was livid but determined to hold on till the morning. If I was going to throw her out, then tough on her, but if it was me walking out the door, then the early hours weren't too welcoming. I still prayed that there'd be an explanation and that in the morning she'd laugh about it and tell me about the stupid prick trying to take advantage of her. She snuggled up to my back, but I pretended to be asleep, refusing to be aroused from my slumbers, even though she cuddled up close, wrapped her arms around me, and kissed the back of my neck. I doubted whether we would ever be sleeping together again, never mind making love. It was with some relief to me that she eventually gave up, probably to her as well. She wouldn't have to pretend anymore. The next morning, I was up and dressed long before her, but then I hadn't had such an energetic evening as she had no doubt experienced. "Hi, sweetie," she called out as she breezed into the living room, her loveliness almost making me change my plans. "How are you this morning?" I didn't reply, just sat there impassively, my heart thumping, and she looked around at me, the cup in her hand crashing back to the table as it slipped from her hand. "What on earth happened to you?" she cried. Her concern could almost have been genuine. The 2 bruises that had been added to the cuts on my face the second time I would been thrown out were obviously a bit of a surprise. Alice made to run to my side, but I held my hand up to stop her. Maybe the look on my face had more to do with it. "What's up, John? What happened?" she demanded urgently. "I got thrown out of a bar last night," I replied tersely. I didn't get the response I expected, but I should have foreseen it. "What? You got thrown out of a bar?" She squealed in her oh-so-English accent. "You stupid man. What did you do? Get drunk or something?" She looked at me and grinned, almost giggled, as she imagined me, the pillar of respectability, getting thrown drunk out of some pub. "Hope it wasn't the bridge, John. We're supposed to be going there tomorrow night." The grin on her face died as she realized I wasn't smiling back. From now on, I would begin to enjoy this little discussion, and in some small way, I would make her suffer for what she had done to me. "What's up, John?" she asked simply. "Sit down," I instructed. "You may need to." I waited a few moments, savoring the tension in her face. She knew something was up but had no idea what. Now the shoe was on the other foot. It wasn't a pub I was thrown out of. It was a bar, a hotel bar. "Hotel bar? What hotel?" "One in Springfield?" she asked, unable to understand where this conversation was going. "Not Springfield. Chicago. The North End, sort of. Lincoln Park way." I noticed a quiver on her lips, no more than that, but the mention of Lincoln Park shocked her. That's where she had spent the night. "Which hotel?" she asked, but she had already dropped her gaze. I guess she knew what was coming. "The Grand Central," I said calmly. "It's just off the square. Maybe you know it, Alice. Maybe you've been there recently, maybe?" Alice ran her hand across her brow and then looked up, trying to force a smile to her face. She didn't know how much I knew. Christ, I didn't know how much I knew. "Okay, so I was there last night. I was working," she whispered, and then spoke louder, more confidently. "Christ, John, you knew I was going there. I told you so. I always tell you where I am going." "What's this all about?" "It's about who you were with," I answered, still calm outwardly, if not inside. She looked straight at me, not sure what to say. "Client. Just a client," Alice said at last, but her voice wavered. "I think she already knew she had lost." "And do all your clients get to feel your ass? Do they all treat you as if they own you? Do they all get kissed like they were your lover?" I threw at her, losing my calm completely. Alice looked at me, and her face dissolved. Then she burst into tears. I should have felt triumph, but all I felt was heartbreak. Our heartbreak. I still loved her, you see. I resisted the temptation to rush to her, cuddle her, and tell her it was all okay, to not worry about it. It was too late for that. I waited as there was no way that I was going to say the next words. What she said next could just make a difference. After a while, she looked up and, while still sniffing back the tears, said, "I love you, John," then burst out crying again, the grief racking through her whole body. I again waited till she settled down, again waited for her to speak first. "What did you see, John?" she asked timidly. "They'll tell you what I saw, you witch. I saw you smile at him and kiss him. I saw you stroking his back and him fondling your backside, which you didn't seem to object to. I saw the two of you going off arm in arm towards the stairs, with his hand halfway up the back of your dress. That's what I saw. I suppose you were off to his bedroom, am I right?" Alice looked at me sadly, sadder than I could ever remember seeing her. She opened her mouth to deny, but stopped, knowing it was a waste of time. Then she nodded her head just enough to acknowledge my fears to be correct, the look in her eyes one of utter despair. "I suppose you screwed one another, screwed away all night, and then had the damn cheek to come back here smelling of him." "That's not true," she wailed back. "I didn't come back like that. I showered before leaving the hotel. I would never do that to you, I promise." I wasn't sure what her promises were worth anymore, so I went on. "Then why did you get changed in the other room? Why didn't you undress in our room like you normally would?" "I didn't want to wake you if you were sleeping. I didn't want to wake you up." Her response was immediate, had the ring of truth, but hardly excused her. "And why was that?" I asked at last. "Because you didn't want me to know how late you were back, maybe?" Alice whispered, almost inaudibly, "Maybe," after some moments, and not for the first time, "I'll bet." I shot at her, her silence confirming my accusation. "What do we do now then, Alice?" I asked after another long silence, the only noise her sniffling as she tried to control her emotions. I wasn't enjoying this as much as I would hoped I would. "I don't know, John. But I do love you. Only you. You're the only one." "Oh yes, Alice, I'm the only one you love. But you make love to some other guy behind my back." "That's really convincing. I really believe that. It was just sex. We didn't make love, not love. It was just sex, fun, exciting even. But just sex. And there's a difference." I questioned her. She nodded her head. "Yes, there's a difference, a big difference. Please, John, understand there's a big difference. I was in no mood to understand the difference and was finding it harder to control my anger. This lover of yours, I continued. Who is he? How long has this been going on? He's not my lover, she insisted. I've told you he's not. It's not what you think, John. Honestly, there's absolutely nothing between us. Please believe me. Shut up, you stupid woman. I interrupted her. Stop making it worse. Stop lying to me. Do you think I'm bloody stupid or something? Tell me now, how long have you been screwing him? Is it weeks or months or maybe years? I only met him last night, said Alice, suddenly calm, though the tears still streamed down her cheeks. I met him at the hotel, probably only 5 or 10 minutes before you spotted us. Oh yes, and I'm supposed to believe that, am I? I suppose he bought you a glass of wine and got you drunk? Took advantage of you, you poor little cow. No, it wasn't like that at all, John, was my beautiful bride's whispered answer. As I said, I was working. He paid me to have sex with him. Alice's story high. I suppose you must all think I'm awful, and I can't blame you. It broke John's heart when I told him the guy in the hotel had paid me for sex, that I was a call girl. I tried to tell him I wasn't, that I worked as an escort girl, but who was I kidding, not even myself anymore. He called me a cheap prostitute, and that really hurt me, made me cry. Somehow, I can't stand the word prostitute, and I just can't think of myself as one. A silly little difference in words, maybe, but it had always allowed me to live with myself. And cheap, I certainly wasn't cheap, not by any standards. My clients were all very rich, and they had to be to pay me and the commission my agency, Golden Circle, took. Top politicians, sportsmen, captains of industry, as the press called them, all sorts and from all over the world as well. Like the other girls, I had regulars once a month maybe, and some of them I would known for some years, a couple before I even met John, though I prayed to God that he'd never discover that fact. There were British, American, Canadian, French, all sorts, quite an international clientele. Mostly it was when they were visiting Chicago, usually on business, but they often invited me away for the weekend, and before I married John, sometimes a week or more. Golly, that always cost them a packet, several thousands, but I guess I gave them good value. When I was with them, I was their girlfriend, their mistress, loving and attentive. For my clients, I must have been the perfect girlfriend, available on demand by way of a simple telephone call to do more or less anything they wanted, and not there when they didn't need me. I never spoiled it by taking money direct from them either. That went through Golden Circle and they then paid my cut. But since I got married, directly into my secret bank account, I never even touched any of that money. I couldn't bring myself to do so, and it had long since been nothing to do with money anyway. That is, except for my so-called monthly salary, which was then transferred to my normal account to cover up what I was up to, and I made a point of letting John see that on a regular basis to make sure he suspected nothing. Then he found that damn statement. The man I loved so completely and desperately found it where I had hidden it overnight, and my world collapsed. I cried for a week, my eyes red with my grief. John had stormed out of the house, and he was crying like a baby. I couldn't believe I could have hurt him so deeply. It was stupid to think I could get away with it forever, and I don't know what I must have been thinking. It had just become my way of life. I would been doing escorting when I met him, and though I would stopped for over 6 months after we got married, it was like a drug, and I drifted back into it. I could claim I was forced, but that is too easy, and I don't deserve easy anymore. I've lost my right to that. I had no idea where he'd gone, where he was living, and despite my calls, he refused to speak to me or even listen to me. I was desperate, almost suicidal, and though I understood his hurt, I knew he loved me, or at least had, and couldn't understand how he could cut me off so abruptly like that. I cut myself off from everyone and didn't have a friend in the world. I realized how my lifestyle had provided me with so many so-called friends, but none I could confide in. Not one single one that I could cry my heart out to. There was one, of course, but he wouldn't speak to me, and who could blame him? I turned down several dates and told them I wasn't well. I must have sounded terrible on the phone, so I guess they believed me, and anyway, I was in no condition to entertain any men. To my shame, even then, I never thought about telling them I was finished with that way of life. I hope it was just because I never thought about it clearly. After about 10 days with no contact, even Laura at his office politely turning down my requests to be put through to him, I decided to go there. By then, I would stopped crying all the time, and my eyes had recovered somewhat, but despite applying my makeup, I still looked a mess. Though I am quite pretty, I know I'm not naturally an outstanding beauty like some girls are, but I've always been able to make the most of my appearance. And I would had the best education that money could buy. I do have a good figure, and I knew how to stand, how to walk, and how to hold myself, as I would been taught by the best in the world at my finishing school in Switzerland. I taught myself how to laugh at men's jokes and how to talk to them on subjects they would be interested in. I knew I had a dazzling smile, but I would been born with that. I was used to heads turning when I walked into a room, and I adored it, almost came to expect it. But I didn't turn any heads that day, none at all. "Christ, Alice, you look terrible," said Laura when I presented myself at her desk. We had become quite friendly over the last few years, but she was now the epitome of discretion, so my appearance must have really surprised her. "Sorry, John is not here. When will he be back?" I asked, fighting to hold back another bout of crying. Laura looked at me pityingly, stood up, and took me gently by the arm. "Come on," she said, "I'm due a break. Let's go and get a coffee somewhere." Over coffee, actually. I drank tea. She told me that John had seen my car pulling into the car park and had gone out through the back door as I would come in through the front. He told her Wed had a big bust-up, but not why, which made me sigh with relief. "He won't discuss it," she said. "He's in a terrible state. Do you want to tell me what it's about?" "I can't," I replied, "but it's my fault, not his." "That bad?" Laura commented with a knowing look. "Worse than that," I replied. "Much worse. I think you need to find someone to talk to about this," she suggested. "Someone close to you that you can trust." It was good advice, but I had nobody I was close to. My parents, an only child, but how do you start a conversation like that? "I haven't mentioned it before, Daddy, but I've been working as a prostitute since I left university, and my husband's just found out." No, it just wasn't possible. I had nobody, and I would have to work it out for myself. But it didn't work out that way. The agency kept ringing me, and eventually, I had to admit what had happened, that my husband had found out. "Oh dear," they said, but that was about all. The last thing they wanted was to get involved in a marital argument. Then a week later, William rang. William was another of my American clients, nearly 60 but in really good shape, a good lover, and I would known him since before I would met John. We got on really well, and I suppose I did have some quite deep feelings for him, though nothing like I had for John. Anyway, he was married, and once I would even met his wife, though I was, of course, introduced as a junior business contact. William was one of only 2 of my dates that I had ever given my telephone number to. I felt I could trust him. "Sorry, William," I said when I heard his voice. "I'm not available at the moment, might not be for some time." "Golden Circle told me your bad news," he said back to me over the phone, and I burst into tears. "You need someone to talk to, don't you?" William went on. "Let's meet somewhere, maybe I can help." "Oh, William, please no. Don't ask me out. I'm in no state to give you what you want. Payback time," he said quietly. "Time I did something for you rather than the other way round. No messing around, I promise. Meet me at the usual place." "No, not there. They'll come up to Springfield." "Where do you suggest?" 5 hours later, I was seated in front of William, and he started to question me. "Do you want him to come back?" he asked first, to which I replied that of course I did. But there seemed to be little chance. "If not, then I would be more than happy to. Well, you know that Diana and me haven't been getting on so well for some time now, and I thought—" I interrupted him. "Please, William, don't lead me down that path. I like you, okay, I love you in some way, but you're not John. Sorry, but you're just not John." William nodded his head sadly. "I expected that, Alice. Sorry, but I had to ask, had to get it out of the way." I smiled at him. He was so sweet. "John won't talk to me, William. He just won't talk to me. I don't know what to do. I don't understand how, if he loved me, he could cut me off like that. And I don't think you've yet realized quite how much you have destroyed him." "His whole world, young lady," William replied. "But he just doesn't understand. It was just sex, just something I need, the excitement. It's like a drug, and I don't seem to be able to exist without it. Going with a range of different men all the time, not knowing who I would be going to bed with from one week to another. I can't seem to explain it to anyone." I poured my feelings out, explaining how even when I would stopped after getting married, I would ended up miserable after just 6 months or so with only one lover, wonderful though he was. And as much as I was in love with him, just sex was it. Ral asked. "Yes, there was never anything else, just sex. The way you smiled at me, the way you kissed me, the way you pleased me, just sex all the time, was it?" William asked. He wasn't asking, he was querying whether I would got my feelings right. I thought about it, remembered what it was like being with him, remembered the feelings with which we had made love. Yes, made love, not had sex. I was kidding myself. And though it had so often been just sex with most of them, an adventure to take part in and forget, with William and a few others for that matter, it had been more than that, far more. Do you remember how you reacted when you found out I would gone with one of the other girls when you were on holiday? Alice? William demanded gently, reminding me of how angry I had been, how I had shouted and screamed at him, sulked for a couple of weeks, even been sharp with poor John, who was so blameless. Can you imagine how John must feel now? Can you imagine how much worse it must be for him? I looked up at William, and it came flooding in the realization of quite what I would done to John, quite how unspeakably awful I had been. I started crying, but this time I wasn't crying for myself. I was crying for him, my husband, my love, and I cried like I would never cried in my life before. I was heartbroken that I would broken his heart. William took me gently in his arms and rocked me tenderly whilst I cried like a baby. As he held me, I can't imagine what I can do, but he'll try, he whispered to me. I just hope he thinks as much of you as I do. I would do anything, absolutely anything, to have just a glimmer of a chance to win John back. I would fight against my need to go with other men, and I prayed to God that I could be strong enough to resist it, to have the willpower to say no. I'm not going to do that anymore, and I would start straight away. Yes, I would. Straight away. I would tell William to stop undoing the buttons of my blouse. I will. I'm determined, I will. I'll tell him to stop immediately. Right now. I mean it, right now. Right now. I'll tell him to stop. I did it because I love John. I stood up and went back home. I was still in my thoughts and feeling the pain. I desperately wanted to meet John. I tried, but I never found him. I tried to call, but his phone was off. 3 days later, I was at my mother's place. A man dressed in a suit came over and knocked on the door. I opened it, and the man asked if I was Mrs. Alice. I nodded. You have been served, he said. He handed me the manila envelope and walked away. It was what I was dreading. I knew I lost John forever. Took 7 months. I fought the divorce, but he never gave in. Finally, the judge granted what John wanted. He never spoke to me. I tried to contact him many times after the divorce, but he never responded. I never married or dated again. As for John, I heard that he moved to a different state and is currently engaged to a schoolteacher. Well, life goes on. Unfortunately for me, it moved to a dark world. Thanks for watching. How would you react if you found out your partner was living a double life? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.